I'm Stephen J. Abramson. Today I have the great pleasure of interviewing the legendary Larry King. And this is for the Archive of American Television. Today is October 29th, 2009, and we are at the TV Academy headquarters in North Hollywood, California.
All right.
Okay, do you want me to I can sit like this too, so I know where you are? Oh, okay, gotcha. Okay. So Larry, we'll start with a little bit of biographical information. We're going to start right at the beginning.
Date of birth.
Exactly. And what day were you born?
I was born on, it was Tuesday. Tuesday or Sunday, now I forgot. November 19th, 1933, the height of the Depression. Roosevelt had been elected and was in his first year of the presidency. And my father was Eddie, and my mother was Jenny. My father was an Austrian immigrant. My mother was from Russia. I had an older brother who had passed away. He was 6 years old when he died of a burst appendix, so I never knew him. And then 3 years later, 1937, 4 years later, my brother Marty would be born. So there's my mother, my father, my brother, and I.
What was your name when at birth?
Birth was Lawrence Harvey Zeiger, and Z-E-I-G-E-R, and it was subsequently changed after my first or second year in radio. I legally changed it to Larry King.
And did you have any nicknames as a kid?
My nickname as a kid growing up in the early teen years, I get say from age maybe 10 on, was Zeke, because my name was Zeiger, and they used to call me Zeke the Creek, the mouthpiece. And that was because I always wanted to be a broadcaster, and I don't know why, but I have no other memory from age 5 of other than wanting to be a broadcaster. So I would always regale my friends with stories and descriptions, and if I went to a ball game, I would come back and detail the ball game to them. So I became Zeke, and they needed something to rhyme with Zeke, so I guess it became Creek, and it was Zeke the Creek, the mouthpiece.
Where were you born, and where did you grow up?
I was born in Brooklyn, New York, and glad of it. I was born in the Brownsville section of Brooklyn, a very tough neighborhood. My father owned a little barn grill called Eddie's Barn Grill. It was at 1925 Fulton Street. And I lived there until, and then we moved to Hopkinson Avenue, which was about 3 blocks away in the same neighborhood. And then my father, I was born at 208 Howard Avenue, by the way, and then I moved to Hopkinson. My father died suddenly when he was 47, I was 9.5. And that pivotally changed my life, and we then moved to the Bensonhurst section of Brooklyn, where I spent my formative years from age 9.5 till I went down to Miami at age 22.
How did it affect you when your father died?
Well, it was traumatic in the sense that I was very close to him. He, because they had lost a son, kind of enveloped me. So he turned me into a sports fan, and he would have me in this little barn grill that he owned, and I knew all the cops in the neighborhood. I spent much more time with him than I did my mother, and when he died, he was a patriotic type, and so they wouldn't take him in after World War II broke out. They wouldn't take him because he was over 40. So he sold the little barn grill, I guess next to nothing. We never had any money. And he went to work at a defense plant because he wanted to help America. And he worked in Kearny, New Jersey, building ships. And he was on the overnight shift. And it was a Friday night. He went to work and never came home. And then on the Saturday morning, June 9th, 1943, I always remember that date, I went to the library, and I was a great student. I skipped 3rd grade. I was very bright. I loved school. I loved reading. I was carrying home 9 books from the library, and I heard, as I came into the apartment house, it was a 4-floor walk-up, and I heard my mother screaming, and all the cops knew my mother and father because of the barn grill, and so these 3 cops, one of them came running down the stairs. I remember there were little tears in his eyes. I didn't know what it was, and the books fell out of my arms. I don't know whatever happened to the books. And the police officer took me in his squad car and drove me around for the rest of the day and told me of my father's death. And that's how I learned he died. And I took it badly. I took it as leaving me. later in discussions with friends, psychologists, and others, I didn't cry. I lost interest in school. I blamed his death on everything, and I used it as an excuse. If I got away with something, my father's dead. I'm the poor kid without a father. And it's something that stayed with me to this day. So loyalty became the biggest attribute I look for in people. I'm intensely loyal. I hate disloyalty. And it must stem back from that I took that as a disloyal act. How could he have done this to leave this little Larry Zyga alone?
Did you and your dad bond over baseball?
We bonded over baseball, bonded over a lot of things, but baseball. In fact, to show you how badly I took his death, he was a Yankee fan. I became a Dodger fan. I don't know why he was a Yankee fan living in Brooklyn, but he was a Yankee fan. And I resisted that and became a Dodger fan, intense Dodger fan, but a baseball purist. To this day, I'm a baseball purist and a Dodger fan.
When you were a kid, did you have hobbies? What did you do to fill your time?
My hobbies with the radio was the number one hobby, listening to the radio, imitating radio announcers. When I got to be like 12, 13, I'd go into Manhattan and visit radio shows. I'd visited Bob and Ray, the Armstrong Circle Theater, quiz shows. I was fascinated with the whole thing, microphones and lights. And when television came in, I was fascinated with how broadcasting happened. I would go to baseball games at Ebbets Field, I'd sit in the bleachers, and I'd go up to the top row, fold up a scorecard, pretend it was a microphone, and broadcast the game to myself. And legendary things worked out because Red Barber was one of my heroes as the voice of the Dodgers. And later in life in Miami, Red would, in his retirement years, come to work and do sports at Channel 4 in Miami, and we run the same program together. I got to know him well, interviewed him, but he was the voice of my baseball childhood. He was the voice in my head. And the first night we worked together on television in Miami, I was doing interviews, and he was doing the sports, and I had taped the interview earlier, but he had to throw it to me to do a live toss to the interview. And when he said, "That's the sports news, now Larry King," and then he turned to me and said, "Larry," with that wonderful Southern voice, a tingle went through my spine. I'm this little kid from Brooklyn who was on relief when my father died, very poor. The radio was my guideline to the world. Red Barber was my voice out to baseball, and here he was saying Larry. I never forgot that. Still don't, never forgot.
Was radio something that, you talked about rolling up the program and pretending it was a microphone. What was the earliest memory you had of hearing radio?
5 and 6 years old. I remember shows that I used to listen to. I was a inveterate radio listener. By that I mean I would hear a program and then imitate the program. A tale well calculated to keep you in suspense. We now have satellite radio, and they have old-time radio, and I hear a lot of shows that I used to listen to. Suspense, Inner Sanctum, The Shadow, Burns and Allen, the Bickersons, Edgar Bergen and Charlie McCarthy, Jack Benny, Jello, Jello, and the voices were indelible to me. So I would listen. So my earliest memory of the radio is lying in bed, looking up at that radio on top of the shelf, my brother in the next bed, and visualizing what did they look like? Were they standing? Were they sitting? Were they holding their scripts? Were they dressed with a tie? Did they have to dress up to be on radio? All these things I wondered about it. It's the theater of the mind. I pictured everything that they described. Yeah, so I'm living a fantasy. I'm doing I didn't know I'd be an interviewer, but I'm living out what a 5-year-old kid dreamed of. My other hobbies were reading and movies and the arts and history. I liked history. I didn't like math, but I was generally a poor student, only because I was just I didn't care. I
Where,
didn't care.
where'd you go to high school?
Went to a pretty famous high school, Lafayette High School, in Brooklyn, New York. Sandy Koufax, Vic Damone, the Aspermani brothers, John Franco, Maurice Sendak, Judge Grippo, federal judge, and a lot of well-known people went there. A lot of successful people went to that high school. When I got an honorary degree at Brooklyn College, one of the things I said was, I never went to college, was the thing about the kids from that era in Brooklyn. There were like 8 or 9 famous high schools, and Madison, Lincoln, Joe Torre, and went to St. Michael's. Everybody did well, even if they were criminals. In other words, even the criminals went to the chair at Sing Sing. They didn't do stupid little 7-Eleven robberies. They were major. We were hits wherever we were. That was our theme. And I didn't know what it was about Brooklyn that festered that. A lot of people ask me, what was it about Brooklyn? In fact, Mario Cuomo, who was from Queens, would say to me often, I'm from Queens. We didn't have what you have. What did Brooklyn have? Maybe because we were an island, because Manhattan was out there. In fact, we referred to Manhattan as, not Manhattan, as the city. Going to the city today? Like we weren't part of the city. Brooklyn was a part. The Dodgers were different. When Brooklyn was mentioned on the radio, it brought laughter or applause. If anyone said, I'm from Brooklyn, quiz show, guest, contestant, where you from, Brooklyn, yay! There was something about it. It was magical. It's magical now. I left Brooklyn, but Brooklyn never left me. That was all part of I'm very glad where I grew up.
What about television? What's your first memory of seeing television, experiencing television?
My first memory of television is standing in windows of stores, we couldn't afford one, and watching things through windows of television stores, usually 10-inch sets. We'd watch baseball through the window. I remember once the Dodgers played a triple-header. The first game was in the morning. And I remember standing in the morning, like 11 o'clock in the morning, on a sunny, hot day, through the window, because of the sun, I had to put the hand over my eyes, and watch a baseball game through a window. And of course, Milton Berle, Tuesday nights, got to know Milty very well later in life. But we'd run to the Vim store, and they'd put a speaker in front, because Milton sold a lot of TV sets. And on Tuesday night, you'd stand through the window, hear the speaker, and watch Milton Berle. My first set was, again, we were poor. Herbie Cohen, whose father owned a hat, he made buyer's bindings for hats. So he was the richest guy in our neighborhood. His father probably made, I'm not kidding, $20,000 a year. He was way up there. And Herbie had the first set, a 10-inch RCA Victor, cost over $1,000. The console was beautiful. We'd gather there to watch this 10-inch black and white set. And my first set, I guess I was 17, 1950, in Emerson. I was working part-time, delivering groceries after high school, and my brother worked in a little clothing store. We chipped in and got my mother the set. I don't remember what it cost, but I remember it never worked right. Either the vertical and horizontal was always off, bars and stuff. We always had to have it fixed. We had the outdoor antenna on top of the little attic apartment we lived in. I remember sitting, this was portrayed in Woody Allen's movie, a couple other movies too, of watching the test pattern. There was no television during the day. Came on at night like 5 o'clock. And we sit and watch the test pattern like 4:30, 4:45. And it was just a pattern, it would say NBC or CBS. And then it would start to flutter. Something's happening. Something's happening. It's howdy doody time. It's howdy doody time. Bob Smith and howdy do. Say howdy do to you. Howdy Doody was my first television experience. And then Zeke Manners had a show. He had a theme song called Television is the Devil's Doing. Brought me ruin, grief and woe. But they were all my heroes. Uncle Don had a radio show. And he cursed once, he got kicked off. The radio never came back again because I used to love him. Uncle Don was a great storyteller. He would read the funnies on Sunday morning, as Mayor LaGuardia also did during a newspaper strike. But Uncle Don had a wonderful voice and a wonderful delivery of pattern. He did this kid show and he had a theme song. And he would end every show with Rippity ripska, high low Z, ammonio figgity, high low D, Arolicas oats and alicas on. Sing this song with your Uncle Don. Good night, little friends. Click. That should hold the little bastards till tomorrow. What? I had my Uncle Don bank. A bank with his picture on it. I threw it out the window. My mother goes running down the stairs. Get the bank, there's money in there. And I never heard from him again. Those are all little fleeting memories that jump in. But television was Howdy Doody, Zeke Manners, Milton Berle, early baseball, one camera behind home plate. The camera would move as the ball went. So my dreams was still radio and then television was an after thing. I got into radio and television 2 years later, always did both, and to this day, treat television the same way I treated radio. I treat television as radio with pictures. So, while I know how glossy it's got and graphics and cut through, still in my head, it's just me talking. It happens to be a picture. So if I had been on radio and you put a camera in a room, same thing. So I never was, a lot of radio guys didn't make it in television because they viewed television as, oh, television, larger than life. It wasn't larger than life to me. It was radio with pictures. That's true to this day. That gave me my intimacy, gave me the ability to communicate, wasn't afraid of it. I let the camera come to me, didn't jump out at the camera. So television's, now it's such a big part of my life, of course. But radio is still in the heart.
With this great love of radio, how did you land your first job?
I knocked around a few jobs in New York. I sold Borden's milk on the phone. We called up mothers who were just gave birth, like 8 men. We had lists from hospitals. We pitched the home delivery of milk. I worked for Hearn's department store. I worked for United Parcel Service as an assistant rider on a truck. All in the back of my mind, someday I'm going to get in the radio, someday I'm going to get in the radio. But it was a dream. And frankly, I was kind of a bum. I went from job to job, go to ball games, hang around the corner, deferred from the draft, 4F because of my eyes, saw other friends go off to the Army or Navy, knocking around. I think I was making, at the time I was walking down the street in Broadway, I was making maybe $90 a week from United Parcel Service, which I give to my mother. I was living with my mother and my brother. And somebody introduced me to a man named James Sermons, who was director of staff announcers at CBS. They were staff announcers then. These were guys who just did, this is CBS, New York. You're watching the CBS television network. Then they'd sit and wait a half hour and say it again. He was head of staff announcers. So I said to him, I always wanted to be in radio, and what do I do? And he says, well, can you leave town? I said, my brother's getting out of college, and my mother's working. Yeah, I could. He would try Miami, because Miami is no union, a lot of stations, more stations than the market should have. And so there's people there either breaking in or on the way out. So you might have a good shot. Now remember, I'd never been before a microphone, ever. I went down to Miami on a train, got off the train. I was going to stay with my uncle, who had a little apartment there. His wife, my mother's sister, had died, and Uncle Jack lived down there, and I was going to stay with him and knock around. First thing I remember is getting off the train. First thing I saw, 2 water fountains, colored white. I drank out of the colored fountain. I had never seen that. It blew my mind. Got on a bus to go into my uncle, rode in the back of the bus. Those civil rights drove me crazy. Another part of the story. Anyway, I looked up radio stations in the Yellow Pages. And I got an address, found buses, got directions, knocked on doors. 3 or 4 said, you don't have any experience, goodbye. I went to this small station, WAHR. The call letter stood for Alan H. Rosenson, the man who owned the station, little small. 250-watt station on Miami Beach, the southern end of Miami Beach, which is now the hottest part of the city. It's now the American Riviera, but then it was just a dumpy little station right across from the police department. And I walked in, and a guy named Marshall Simmons, a wonderful man, he died, cancer. He said, well, okay, we have a lot of kids, a lot of people leave, a lot of people come. We'll give you a mic test. What do you want to be? I said, I just want to be on radio. So I sat down, he gave me a newscast, I read it. I'd never read before, they taped me. This was 1957, April. And he said, oh, you got a nice voice, yeah, nice looking guy. We always have jobs opening. We don't have one at the present. It'll be a disc jockey, and you'll do everything if we hire you, news, sports, disc jockey, everything. So you want to hang around? Want to learn radio? So I said, okay. I lived with my Uncle Jack, so I had no expenses. He fed me. I never had more than $20 in my pocket. And I'd go to the radio station every day and watch them rip off the wire stories, sit with disc jockeys and watch them cue records, watch the sportscaster do sports, watch the wire stories come in. I was fascinated. This dumpy little station. And then one day Marshall Simmons called me and he said, Tom Baer had to quit. It was funny. He had to quit because he was making $55 a week and his alimony was $60 a week. Tom Baer figured out he could never quite make it. So he was going to go do something else. And he was on the air from 9 to 12 in the morning. Would I like to take over that shift? This was a Friday, starting Monday morning. Oh my God. You'll be on from 9 to 12, starting Monday morning. I went back to Uncle Jack's apartment and never slept the whole weekend. Good morning, this is Larry Zeiger. Hi, I'm Larry Zeiger. Picking out my records. I came in on Sunday to the radio station. You pick your own music then. So I picked, Sinatra and all these kind of things. Picked out my music. I wanted to play music. Going to do news. You did everything. Sports. You did it all. It was like 10 people worked on the air. I was so freaking excited and nervous and scared. And my $50 a week was my pay. And now it's Monday morning. It's 8:45. And I'm beside myself. I'm beside myself. It was May 1st, 1957. And Marshall Simmons calls me in to pep me up. My first day on the air. He says, good luck, kid. I was, I guess, 23, 22 and a half. And then out of nowhere, he says, what name are you going to use? What do you mean? What name? I said, my name is Larry Zeiger. Nah, that won't do. Now, of course, you'd use anything. Nah, people won't remember it, won't know how to spell it. It's too ethnic. Another name. About to go on the air. And he had the Miami Herald open, and there was an ad for King's Wholesale Liquors. And he said, how about Larry King? I said, sounds okay to me? Okay, you're Larry King. About a year later, I would legally change it. So I'm Larry King. Now I go into the studio. There's news on. It was ABC News at the ABC network. ABC News is on. I sit down with my records. Cue up Les Elgart swinging down the lane. That was my theme song. Da 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 da. Look up at the clock. It's 9:04:30. I go on 9:05. 9:05. This is the ABC Radio Network. Shut that off. Click on the music. Up goes Larry Elgart. Les Elgart, rather. Da 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 da. Fade the music. Put on the mic. Nothing. Go. Bring the music back up. Fade the music. Bring the music back up. The control room was right to my right. Marshall Simmons kicks open the door. And he says, this is a communications business. Damn it, communicate. And he slammed the door shut. I did something at that moment. It is 52 and a half years later. I would do the same thing today. I didn't know that I did the right thing. But what I did that day was communicate honestly with my audience. I faded the record down, turned the mic on. I said, good morning. My name is Larry King, and that's the first time I've ever said that. I had another name, but the general manager gave me this name to use. And so this is my first day on the air. And I've dreamed of this all my life. The music's playing behind me. So I'm going to try to do the best I can. And I hope you enjoy the next 3 hours. I was never nervous again, ever, ever. And what I didn't know what I was doing then is what I did then was what I would do now. I brought the audience into my situation so that they had to either turn me off or root for me. But if I miscued a record or read a commercial wrong, and you're listening, you got to say, hey, this kid's first day on the air, right? And it became my vehicle of being direct, honest. Same thing today. That was my first day of broadcasting. I'll never forget. And I was never, ever nervous again. First night on television, I wasn't nervous. It's just that it's another story. But I was nervous. I was in a situation that made it nervous.
The following year, in 1958, you moved to another radio station, WKAT. Why did you move?
Because I was good. You know, and KT was a bigger station called the Big Cat. And because I was good, I stood out. I mean, the guys on the station were either a little older or young guys who were okay, but they didn't take risks. And I took risks. There was a sign up at WHR which said, if in doubt, leave it out. I broke that rule. I never thought about if in doubt. I went to the moment. If the moment happened, I made it happen. So the people at KT heard this kid, Larry King, and they brought me over there. And this changed my whole career because now they put me on in the morning, drive time. And I was doing a lot of humor, did voices, did all the things that morning jocks do. I was the Don Imus of Miami, but a little bigger station, starting to get a little well known. And then the owner of Pumpernickel's restaurant, he used to listen to me. And he really liked what he heard, and I did a real personality show. So he had a hole in the morning. Pumpernickel's was a 24-hour, very famous deli show business hangout like Lindy's in New York, and like Wolfie's, and very famous place. But that 10 to 11 hour was really mystifying. You know, it wasn't breakfast, wasn't lunch. So he came to WKT. He said, I'd like to take this kid, Larry King. He gets off at 9. I'd like to have him come up and do my show from 10 to 11, and I'll pay him $50 a week. Now, I was making, I think, $100 at KAT. I was also the announcer at the dog track at night because they liked me. So I was pooling all together. I was making about $200 a week. So I got this gig, and what am I going to do at Pumpity? Interview people. I never interviewed everyone. I'm a comedy disc jockey. So they put me in the window, facing inside. There was a sign in the window, and facing the audience, whatever audience there would be there. And on my show in the morning, I would plug, see you later at Pumpernickel's. And then I'd be on at Pumpernickel's from 10 to 11. And that first week, I interviewed waiters, waitresses, people coming in. What do you do, sir? Come on up. And that's where I developed my style, which was intensely curious, short questions, and very little preparation, because how could I prepare? There was no producer, right? And then one day, about the third week, Bobby Darin walked in. Bobby Darin had insomnia, and he was singing at the Deauville across the street. I love Bobby Darin. And so he had heard me, and he decided to come in and see what this was all about. So I called him up. Now, I had no bio on Bobby Darin. All I knew was Mac the Knife, which was the #1 hit. And I interviewed Bobby Darin. And we took a long walk down Collins Avenue. The Miami Herald heard that and wrote a whole story about Larry King, this new kid in the morning. And then suddenly that became the talked about show in town. Jimmy Hoffa came in, Ed Sullivan, Danny Thomas, famous people, infamous people, mob people. The joint was jammed every morning. Saturday morning was children's morning. Bring your kids. And I interviewed kids for an hour. I got to love that. So I just developed this style of interviewing, which later Channel 10 heard. And they were just going on the air. They just got the license. And they asked me to do a Sunday night interview show. And that began it all. And then I went to WIOD, left Pumpernicks, did a nighttime talk show. The rest was history.
One of the characters you created for your morning radio show was Captain Wainwright of the Miami State Police. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah. Oh, that was one of the funniest. That was really a funny character. I would drive around listening to radio, always listen to radio, and I would hear traffic reports. And it always amazed me when the guy giving the traffic report would say, I-95 is jammed from 79th Street to 135th Street. I recommend using 7th Avenue. It's wide open. 20 minutes later, 7th Avenue is jammed. I-95 is clear. So this guy was controlling traffic. So I didn't have a traffic reporter at KAT. So I invented a Captain Wainwright, who was a captain with the Miami-Dade Department of Police. And what I did was I had a little pedal. When I hit the pedal, it caused the microphone to have like a little crickly sound. And I just took a voice like, hello. And I talked to myself. Let's go to Captain Wainwright. Larry, good morning. And he would give traffic reports, okay? But he was funny. He was my alter ego. He was my Charlie McCarthy. And what he did, I keep referring to him as he, because I always felt like he was a he. It was really strange. It got to be weird. He would cut in. I'd be talking about something else. He'd cut in. I'd be doing a newscast. He'd cut in. And he'd give lie reports. He'd say like, Larry, you know the detour sign up at the Julia Tuttle Causeway? We finished the construction, but we haven't taken the detour signs down yet. You can go around it. Just have all the traffic go around. Then he'd go back on 20 minutes. We've tied him up for 5 miles. And then the city would call me. What are you doing? I was causing havoc. I had order your own siren and flashing light. $45 from Captain Wainwright. Put it on your car. Drive anywhere. Give tickets. Order your fake ticket holder. You can give tickets to friends. Have laughs. Take bets on racetracks. He became a rogue. He became everything that the bad cop is, with a delightful personality. We gave out bumper strips called "I know Captain Wainwright, don't stop me." It was just out of control. But when I switched over to nighttime, of course, he went the way as well. But that was, if you know, in Miami history, those years of Captain Wainwright, 58, 59 to 61, in there were legendary. He became. I can never. I don't do voices. It wasn't a real. I mean, you knew it was me. I was just taking this silly little voice, but people loved him. You know, they tried to do drawings of him. What does Captain Wainwright look like? We had contests. It was a lot of fun.
The TV show you mentioned, was that Miami Undercover?
Yep, that was Miami Uncovered. Uncovered. One or the other, I forget.
And what was the concept of that?
The concept that was a takeoff on David Suskind's Open End in New York, which was I would go on at 11:30 Sunday night on WLBW. That stood for L.B. Wilson. That was a company out of Cincinnati that got the rights to Channel 10. National Airlines owned Channel 10. And they used to promote it as the station of the stars with the airline of the stars. They lost their license because of that, because they were using a commercial product to promote their own entity, which at that time the FCC didn't allow. They lost their license. And LBW, the L.B. Wilson Company of Cincinnati, which owned television stations in Cincinnati, got the license. So they hired all new people, and they liked me on the radio. And they said, how would you like, we need a Sunday night interview show. And their idea was, we'll go on at 11:30 and go off when you want to go off. It was open end, stay on all night. So there were nights I went off at 2, some with Jackie Gleason, I stayed till 4:30. And that really honed my style, man. I liked television because I treated it as radio, wasn't awed by it. And we would do controversial shows, interesting interviews, guests, panel discussions, anything. I was the producer, very little money. I booked the guests, it was really well. We had our TV guide listings every week, and it was really fun. And it was called Miami Uncovered. And it was just, but the first night, that was my first night on television. And our subject was, should communist China be allowed into the UN? This is 1960. And I had one guest in favor, one guest against, and me in the middle. We didn't really have a set. It was chairs, you know, nice looking, bright. Except they gave me a swivel chair. And since it was the first night, we had no sponsors. Eventually we had a lot of sponsors, but we had no sponsors. So I had a swivel chair, no breaks, just keep going till you're done. You could smoke then on television. I was a 3-pack a day smoker. So I went on the air, good evening, wasn't nervous, turned to ask the first question, and swiveled. And I couldn't stop swiveling all night. I'd have to grab down to try to stop swiveling. And so I tried to grab it, and I'd swivel a lot. I wasn't nervous, but it must have looked like I was nervous because I kept swiveling. The guest would answer me, while smoking, sometimes all you saw was swiveling smoke. So the Miami Herald critique of this show was, we have a whole new concept in broadcasting, a swiveling smoke screen of an interviewer. We think he's there. The content was pretty good if you can get through the visual distraction. That was my beginning of television. And Gleason then played later a big part. He came to town. I emceed his arrival. Had a big dinner, welcomed Jackie Gleason, went up and came down on the train with him from New York. He took a liking to me. I was lucky that way. People liked me. So despite the fact I got in a lot of trouble off the air, which would be another part of this, I guess, on the air I never called into, never reprimanded. Management liked me, personalities. I don't know what that was, but Gleason liked me. So he came and did my late night Sunday night show, and he called into my radio show. And he was just a joy. But he was a control freak. So he gets there the first night, he comes there before me. And Barbara Streisand was the same way, by the way. He changed the set. He said, I've been watching you. I don't like the way the show looks. What do we got here? We're walking through the station. What do we got here? So the general manager's office was locked. Let's get in there. We find the janitor. He opens the door. We used his furniture. From the general manager, we moved in a new couch. Gleason is helping us carry this. Jackie Gleason, #1 star on television, is carrying a couch into a studio on an ABC affiliate on a Sunday night, 11:30 p.m. show, opening to set up a new set. When I moved later to Channel 4, he did the promos of my moving. He was a piece of work, but he was very good to me. Helped a lot.
Can you tell us the story of how Gleason helped you land Frank Sinatra as a guest?
It's really one of the great stories. Jackie Gleason never read fiction. He only read fact, and he read biographies, and he was absorbed with interesting, calculative questions about things, life and death. Where do we go after it? What is this? I'm a Roman Catholic, he used to call himself. He was interested in psychics. He didn't believe in it, but he was fascinated by it. So we're at his house one night, a few people, and the subject of conversation at dinner was, before he got drunk late every night, so he didn't want to be there late. But early was fun. He was very bright. What in your profession is impossible? And we had a doctor there. He said, what's impossible? Impossible in medicine. And the doctor said, this was 1963, about 63, 64. They will never make blood in a lab. And they'll do lots of crazy things in life they'll cure diseases, but they will never go into a laboratory and make blood that you can give to someone. You can give transfusions, you can make plasma from blood, but you'll never make blood. That's God. That's impossible. He goes right up to me. What's impossible? I said, well, in addition to my television work, I do a local radio show every night from 9 to 12 on WIOD radio. It's a studio show, guests and phone calls. Frank Sinatra's opening at the Fontainebleau next week. I'd say Frank Sinatra, who was the #1 star in the world at this time. Frank Sinatra was Michael Jackson and Elvis Presley rolled into one in 1960. You couldn't get bigger. He avoided the press. Frank Sinatra to do my radio show for 3 hours during the time he's in Miami. And Jackie, I can still see him. You got him. I said, what? You got him. What night is he dark? I said, they don't work Monday nights. Next Monday, you got him. I said, okay, Jackie, I'm going to plug it. Pal, I said you got him, you got him. So I go back, and that night on the air, I said, ladies and gentlemen, don't forget next Monday night, Frank Sinatra. Wow. The papers are writing up Frank Sinatra to appear on Larry King. Frank now opens at the Fontainebleau. The station calls me in on Friday and said, listen, we're preparing a big ad for the Miami Herald for Monday morning. You sure you got him? I told me you got him. He said, well, we've called the Fontainebleau a lot, left messages, and he hasn't returned any calls or messages. So we don't know that he's coming, and the ad's going to cost a little piece of money. I don't know what to tell you. So he said, we'll run the ad. Maybe I ought to call Jackie. I called Jackie Friday. He's out on the golf course. Gets in later. Yeah, what, pal? I said, well, I just want to check. Is Frank... Did I tell you he's coming? He got mad. I said, okay, Frank. Okay, Jackie, I'm sorry. Sorry. Now it's Monday night. It's 5 to 9. The whole radio station stayed. The people who worked during the day did not go home. Secretaries, anybody, salesmen. Because to be in Frank Sinatra's presence was unbelievable. You couldn't be bigger. I'm standing, it's 5 to 9, I go on at 5 after 9, right after the news, till 12. Suddenly this limo comes, pulls in, Frank gets out, and his PR guy gets out with him, Jim was his last name, I'll think of his last name. Jim comes up the stairs and says, who's Larry King? So he said, I don't know how you got him. He said, I get paid not to get him here. Okay. I don't know how you got him. And Frank says, who's Larry King? We're all standing there. I go, sheepishly. Okay, let's go. You know, Frank, let's go. We go into the studio. Again, let's go back to my first day on the air. Honesty, directness. Good evening. My guest tonight is Frank Sinatra. Why are you here? Now, a lot of guys would have said, my guest tonight is the famous Frank Sinatra, or he's here at the Fontainebleau, or my old friend Frank Sinatra. None of that. Why are you here? Because the audience has got to wonder how I got him. I don't know how I got him, except what Gleason told me. Then he says, Frank says, well, 5, 6 years ago, I'm working Ben Maxick's Town and Country Club in New York. Saturday night, closing night, I got laryngitis. And we've got a packed house. So I call up my friend Jackie. I said, Jackie, would you come over and do an hour for me? I can't sing. Gleason came over, did an hour. I walked him out to his limo when he's leaving. I leaned in. I said, Jackie, I owe you one. I check into town to sing here at the Fontainebleau. I get a message to call Gleason. I call up. She answers the phone. I said, Jackie, it's Frank. And all he said was, Frank, this is the one.
Great story.
And from that development, we did a couple of radios and 2 television. The last television appearance he did was on Larry King Live. And from that radio show, at the end of the show, he says, hey, kid, you're pretty good. Want to come see my show? I said, sure. He says, okay, I'll leave 2 tickets. There'll be a reservation for 2 tomorrow night. First show, dinner show. So I knew that any girl I invite, I'm going to score. Because if I take a girl to see Frank Sinatra at his invitation, hey, but remember, I'm poor. I'm always poor, always out of money. All I had was like $20. I'm getting a free, if I got a tip, I got to give the car, right? So I think, okay, the car's going to cost me $3. I got to have cigarettes. I'll tip $15, right? I go front row, front table. Oh my God. Frank Sinatra's on stage. In the middle of his show, he always came out, took a cup of tea, and conversed with the audience. And he says, last night I don't do this, folks, but Jackie Gleason asked me to do this radio show, and I owed him a favor. I did. And I want to tell you, I had a great time. This kid interviewed me. He's a great interviewer. I'd like to have you meet him. You're going to hear about him. Larry King, stand up. Well, it was dessert time. I'm eating Cherry's Jubilee. That's the ice cream with cherries and syrup. I stand up, bang, it hits me, it falls all over me. Cherry Jubilee's over my face, the thing. The girl is sitting there looking. Frank starts to laugh. The entire audience cracks up. And then we're driving home. Now, I have no money. Zip. And the girl says, you want to come over and spend the night? Yeah. She says, oh, I'm out of coffee. Can we stop at Royal Castle, get some coffee? I pull into the lot. What do? I got no money. I go into Royal Castle, I walk back out, and I said, they don't have change for 100. She bought the coffee. That was the Sinatra story.
When you had Sinatra on the radio, were you at WIOD at that point?
Oh, yeah.
And you moved there because it was a bigger station?
Oh,
or?
yeah, that was the clout station. We
What-
had the Miami Dolphins. I did the color for the Dolphins when they came to town later. The wonderful Isle of Dreams. We were on the causeway. We got 20 shares. That was unheard of. We were dominant radio station. We had personalities, and we were kick-ass.
And did you broadcast from a houseboat?
That was initially from Houseboat and then from the studio.
What was-
Houseboat was Surfside 6. It was a famous houseboat then, was a television show. The boat was moored right opposite the Fontainebleau Hotel. And I did about 4 years at the boat. Guests would come across the street, come across from the Fontainebleau, across the street, go on the boat. We did shows. It was a lot of fun.
So you were at WIOD for a number of years. In the early 70s, you had some legal problems
I did.
and a career setback. How did you come back from that?
I guess later in the interview we'll discuss what those. I'll be happy to discuss anything. Well, I was out of work, and I went to work at a racetrack, and I was really at the bottom. Now remember, I was really at the top in Miami. I had a television show, had a newspaper column, the Miami Herald Daily, a television show on the weekends called News Weekend, which I was on 4 times a weekend. The 2 early shows were in the top 20 shows in the market, and my nightly radio show. And I did a lot of personal appearances, a lot of speeches, Rotary, openings, conventions, theater openings. They used to call me Mr. Miami, and then I got into this imbroglio during the Jim Garrison investigation into the Kennedy killing. Lou Wolfson was a friend of mine. It was a whole big exchange of money. Anyway, I lost my job. So I was out of work, went to Louisiana, worked at the opening of Louisiana Downs racetrack, did some announcing there. Had a young daughter, I was supporting her, child support, just hanging by a thread. Went out to California, a friend of mine lived in San Francisco. I knocked around and got a job to announce Cal football, starting in the fall. And I thought I'd wean my way in. And this was like June, football started in August. So I had 2 months, and I had this beat-up old car, and I drove cross-country to see my mother in Miami.
This was around 74, 75?
74,
Okay.
right there, 74, 75. I drive back to Miami, and I'm staying with my mother at her house, her apartment, and the phone rang. A guy named Joe Abernathy, and he said, I'm Joe Abernathy. I'm general manager at WIOD. I'm listening to your old tapes here. I'm putting together, I want to redo this station. I've got an idea for programs called The Great Entertainers. Bringing in Big Wilson from New York, hiring this other guy. I want to get the 4 or 5 top entertainers I could find, and I love your work. So I read what happened to you and the squabble you had. As I read it, you were more a victim. You were a fall guy for a situation with people way above your head. Would you like to come back to work? I'm going to start you out doing all night, but then I'll work you into earlier. Can only pay you $400 a week. You bet. Called California, told them I couldn't come back, and went back on the air in 1975. I've been out of Miami off the air, I guess, 2.5 years. And my first word was, as I was saying, back to doing Dolphin football, back to getting a column with the Miami News, back to television, went back to the old Channel 10 again, did sports, and then out of the blue, 1978, the Mutual Network, head of the Mutual Network came to me and said, we're planning to do an all-night talk radio show. You would be the perfect host because it's going to need someone who can talk about a variety of subjects, sports, politics, entertainment, do interviews, carry a show all night long. We're going to take calls from all over the country. I said, that'll never work because radio is so local. It's just a local medium. How is, if I put on the mayor of New York, why is someone in Phoenix going to be interested? But Ed Little, who was running the Mutual Network at the time, he said, well, I think the country's getting smaller and smaller. We're getting, everybody knows about everybody. So I think talk radio can work. I know it's local now, but I think national talk radio can work, and I think you're the guy to carry it. So let's roll the dice. Well, I was making $50,000 a year now at this point. And he said, we'll give you 75. I had just got married to Sharon. She had 2 daughters. I had my daughter. But you're going to have to move to Washington. We'll do the first 7, 8 weeks out of Miami, and then we all move to Washington. Want to roll the dice? We'll give you a 1-year deal. I rolled the dice. Started with 26 stations. And wound up when I left the show, I gave it up because I couldn't do both shows anymore, CNN and that. And I had a heart attack in between, heart surgery. We were at, I think, 580 stations. So I'm the forerunner of what is now a national craze of Limbaugh's, all these guys now who I'm not a fan of, but they're all out there. But we can always say we were the first national talk show.
When you came back to WIOD in '75, was your audience still there for you?
I assumed, I guess. The papers were very nice. Welcome back. They rehashed the old story. And I was looked at it kind of like the little guy who got caught in this swirl. But I was on all night. There was no way to measure it because I used to be on earlier. So, but that Great Entertainers took off. IOD did very well. But then, within a year and a half, I was on nationally and left the market. So I would say, yeah.
So when you were on, when you started the Mutual Network overnight talk show on radio, was the format already decided on at that point, or
They
did you
let
kind
me
of
do the format.
So
They said, you're on for 5 hours. What do you think we should do? I said, okay, we'll have different parts of the country tuning in. Remember, it's an all-night show, so parts would be delayed. I said, I'll do the first 3 hours with guests, and then 2 hours of open phone America. So the first 3 hours we'd have guests, and we had from Al Gore to Bill Cosby to Frank Sinatra. Jackie Gleason was the first guest, naturally. He was going to help me get it started. Don Shula, a lot of sports. And then 3 hours we'd have the guest. Hour and a half interview, hour and a half phone calls for the guests, 3 hours. It could be debates, could be politicians. Marvin Hamlish playing piano, a lot of great shows. And then from 3 to 5 was Open Phone America. People could call in, ask sports, you never knew what one caller was going to do to the next. No calls were screened. All the girl at the phone would do was say, what city are you calling from? And then she would give me the city in my ear, We never asked what they were going to ask, which is because on television they ask everything. What are you going to ask? Because television is much more frightened media than radio. And they're afraid of what would happen if someone came on and said something crazy. So what? That was our thing. So people said crazy things on the radio. A lot of times I used it to make fun with them. A lot of fun happened, a lot of laughs. It was an intriguing, and it worked. And we started picking up big stations, big stations. I run into so many people now who tell me when I tour for a book or something, I ran the board. I was the board operator in Salt Lake City when you were on our station at night. And now those were fun days. But then when I started with CNN in '85, it started being, then I had a heart attack in '87 and heart surgery. It started being into the '90s a bit much, and I started making real great money at CNN. I didn't need, whoever thought I'd ever say in my life, I didn't need the $2 million a year that Mutual was paying me. But I got along without it, and the CNN thing worked.
On the overnight show.
Are we in time?